don't need a lecture ID now. That's it. Turn around.
Panting!
Am I being detained?
I am not resisting. You are violating my civil rights.
Put your hands on the hood of the car. Now. The command cut through the midday street like a blade. It wasn't a request. It was a threat, sharpened by a badge and backed by a hand resting inches from a loaded gun. Officer Kyle Rohr stood squared up on the sidewalk outside one of the most expensive restaurants in the city's financial district. His posture was aggressive, his jaw tight, his eyes locked onto a woman who had done nothing more than exist in the wrong place. In his opinion, he wasn't responding to a crime. There was no emergency, no danger. What he was responding to was a call that said someone didn't belong. Kyle Rohr was 32 years old, 5 years on the force, and already known inside the department. 14 complaints sat in his internal affairs file. Excessive force, unlawful detentions, verbal abuse. Most of them dismissed. The rest ended in paid leave vacations disguised as discipline. Rohr had learned a dangerous lesson early in his career. The badge rarely pays a price. To him, fear was respect, and respect was something you forced out of people. On this bright Tuesday afternoon, under a clear sky and in full view of lunch-hour crowds, he decided to assert that power. The woman stood calmly on the public sidewalk, a menu posted in a brass case beside her. She was dressed professionally, composed, silent. But silence didn't protect her. "You heard me," Rohr snapped, stepping closer. Hands on the hood. "Do it now, or I'll make you do it." Pedestrians slowed. Phones hovered halfway out of pockets. Because everyone could feel it. This wasn't about the law. It was about control. And Officer Kyle Rohr was about to make the worst mistake of his career without realizing the woman standing in front of him understood the law far better than he ever had. "I have committed no crime." "Officer." The woman's voice was calm, not raised, not shaking. It carried the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly where she stood. Kyle Rohr froze for half a second. That pause, barely noticeable, was the first crack. People weren't supposed to answer him like that. "I'm asking you one last time," he barked, stepping into her personal space. Now." She didn't step back. She didn't flinch. She simply looked at him over the rim of her reading glasses. "Unless you can articulate reasonable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime," she said evenly. "I am not required to identify myself." The words hit Rohr like a slap. He wasn't used to civilians knowing the law. He was especially not used to being corrected in public. His face flushed red. To him, this wasn't a legal discussion. This was defiance. Contempt of cop. "You think you're smart," he sneered. "You want to play lawyer." Pedestrians slowed. A man in a suit stopped. A woman turned her phone sideways. Rohr unbuttoned the retention strap on his holster, not drawing the weapon. Just enough to make the threat unmistakable. "I can invent a reason," he said quietly. "Disorderly conduct. Loitering. Resisting. Take your pick." This was the moment a professional officer would de-escalate. This was the moment training mattered. But Kyle Rohr didn't see a citizen exercising her rights. He saw a black woman in a high-end district who, in his mind, didn't belong and had the audacity to say no. And in his world, no was something he punished. What he didn't know was that every word he spoke, every inch he closed, was being etched into a record that would soon be played back in slow motion frame by people far more powerful than him. The woman standing in front of Officer Kyle Rohr was not afraid. Not because she believed she was safe, but because she had spent her entire life preparing for moments exactly like this. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Vance. At 58 years old, she carried herself with the kind of calm that couldn't be faked. It came from decades spent inside courtrooms, from standing at lecterns under hostile questioning, from arguing against men who believed volume equaled authority. Before becoming a tenured professor of constitutional law at one of the nation's most prestigious universities, Evelyn had spent 20 years as a civil rights litigator. She had taken police departments to court. She had cross-examined officers who sounded exactly like Kyle Rohr. She had watched careers collapse under oath. She had helped define the very boundaries of power he was now crossing. But standing on that sidewalk, none of that mattered. She wasn't a professor. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't a symbol. She was simply a citizen waiting for lunch. The restaurant behind her glowed with marble and brass, the kind of place where power brokers shook hands over expensive wine. Evelyn had eaten there many times before. She knew the owner. She had a reservation. She had arrived early, stepped outside to enjoy the fresh air, and paused to read the menu posted near the entrance. That was it. She wasn't blocking the sidewalk. She wasn't speaking to anyone. She wasn't asking for money. She was standing still, and in this city, for a black woman in a tailored suit. Standing still had apparently become suspicious. Evelyn knew how this played out if you weren't careful. She had represented people who hadn't made it home. She had seen how quickly a simple encounter could spiral, so she did the one thing that protected her best. She stayed calm. She spoke clearly, and she let the officer keep talking. Because the more he spoke, the more the truth revealed itself. And Officer Kyle Rohr was revealing far more than he realized. Inside the restaurant, someone was watching. Through the tall glass windows of the Gilded Oak, Trent Miller, the floor manager, stood with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the woman outside. He was 29 years old, 3 months into his first real management position, and terrified of losing control. Trent prided himself on curation, the lighting, the music, the clientele. In his mind, the Gilded Oak wasn't just a restaurant. It was an image, and anything that disrupted that image made him nervous. When he first noticed Evelyn standing near the entrance, he told himself it was nothing. But then she didn't move. She checked her watch. She kept reading the menu. 5 minutes passed. To a rational person, that meant one thing: a customer waiting. To Trent, it meant something else entirely. She's been standing there too long. He muttered to the hostess. She's probably early. The hostess replied, barely glancing up. She looks like she's reading the menu. No, Trent said quietly. She's loitering. He didn't walk outside. He didn't ask if she needed help. He didn't say a word to her. Instead, he reached for the phone. Non-emergency, he said when dispatch answered, his voice suddenly urgent. We have a situation out front. What kind of situation? The dispatcher asked. There's a woman refusing to leave. Trent lied. She's aggressive. She's making customers uncomfortable. The dispatcher paused. Is she threatening anyone? She might be intoxicated. Trent added quickly. She doesn't belong here. That phrase, doesn't belong, did all the work. The call went out as a disturbance. And 3 blocks away, Officer Kyle Rohr heard the radio crackle. An aggressive subject, refusing to leave, causing a scene. He smiled as he hit the lights. Because what Trent didn't know and what Rohr didn't care to question was that every lie in that call would soon be dissected under oath. And the moment he hung up that phone, Trent Miller set forces in motion that he would never be able to stop. Officer Kyle Rohr didn't ease into the scene. He pulled his cruiser up hard to the curb. Lights flashing once, just enough to announce authority without drawing attention from dispatch. He stepped out quickly, adjusted his duty belt, and walked straight toward the woman on the sidewalk. No greeting, no introduction, no questions. "Ma'am, you need to move along," he said sharply. "Now," Evelyn turned to face him fully. "Excuse me, officer. I'm waiting for a lunch companion. I have a reservation inside. The manager says you're harassing customers and refusing to leave." Roar snapped. "That's trespassing." "That is false." Evelyn replied calmly. "I haven't spoken to anyone since I arrived. I'm standing on a public sidewalk." "I don't care what you call it." Roar said, "This is a lawful order." "It is not a lawful order," Evelyn corrected, without raising her voice. "You cannot order a citizen to vacate a public sidewalk without reasonable suspicion of a crime." Roar stepped closer. "You want to lecture me," he sneered. "You're loitering. You're causing a disturbance." "I am not loitering," Evelyn said, "and standing while black is not a crime in this state." A few heads turned. A man in a suit stopped walking. A phone came out. Roar felt it the attention. The shift. "Id," he demanded. "Give me your ID. Now." "No," Evelyn said. "This is a consensual encounter. I am not required to identify myself." Roar's jaw clenched. "Are you refusing a lawful order?" "Are you detaining me?" Evelyn asked calmly. "If so, please articulate the crime." That question landed hard, because now, in front of witnesses, Kyle Roar had a choice: walk away or double down. And for a man who believed the badge was the law, walking away was never an option. Kyle Roar didn't answer her question. He couldn't, because he had no crime to name. Instead, he did what officers like him always did when words failed. He reached for force. "That's it," Roar growled. "Turn around." "Officer," Evelyn said, her voice dropping slightly. Steady but unmistakably firm. "If you put your hands on me without probable cause, you are violating my civil rights under the Fourth Amendment." Roar heard the words, but he didn't process them. All he felt was the audience. The phones now fully raised, the eyes watching him. And he snapped. He grabbed Evelyn's arm and twisted it behind her back. A sharp gasp cut through the air. "I am not resisting," Evelyn said loudly, projecting her voice. "I am complying." The phrase was deliberate, clear. For the cameras, Roar slammed her against the hood of his cruiser. Metal clanged. The sound echoed down the street. "Stop resisting," he shouted, though she wasn't moving. Handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists, pulled tight enough to bite into her skin. "Hey, take it easy," a man in a gray suit called out. "She didn't do anything," a woman said, holding her phone high. Roar ignored them all. From inside the restaurant, Trent Miller watched through the window. His lips curled into a brief, satisfied smile. In his mind, the problem was being removed. He didn't realize he was watching the exact moment his own life began to unravel. Roar shoved Evelyn forward, pressing her chest against the hood. "You wanted to quote the law," he hissed near her ear. "Quote it from the back of the car." Evelyn closed her eyes for half a second, not in fear, but in focus. She was already memorizing details. The badge number, the time, the witnesses. Because she knew something Kyle Roar didn't. From this moment on, everything belonged to the record. Kyle Roar yanked open the back door of his cruiser and shoved Evelyn inside. The plastic seat was hard and narrow. The air smelled like disinfectant and old tension. The door slammed shut with a final, metallic thud. "You're done," Roar said flatly, walking around to the driver's side. Evelyn sat up straight, despite the cuffs digging into her wrists. She didn't cry out. She didn't argue. She did something far more dangerous. She paid attention. She memorized the badge number stitched on the back of the seat, the time on the dash clock, the street names as they passed. 12:23 M. Roar turned the radio up loud, filling the car with noise, another small act of dominance. He didn't look back at her once. Evelyn stared at the back of his head, calm now in a way that unsettled even herself. Fear had passed. What remained was clarity. She was already drafting the lawsuit in her mind. When they reached the precinct, Roar pulled her out roughly and marched her through the rear entrance, past holding cells and concrete walls stained with years of use. Phones rang. Officers typed reports. No one looked twice until they reached the booking desk. The desk sergeant looked up. His name was Miller, 60 years old, 3 months from retirement. A man who had seen every kind of bad stop walk through those doors. His eyes moved from Evelyn's cuffs, to her suit, to her posture. Then he looked at Kyle Roar. "What do we have here?" Sergeant Miller asked. His voice tired but alert. "Trespassing. Disorderly conduct. Refusing to ID." Roar rattled off quickly. "Resisting." Miller raised an eyebrow and looked at Evelyn. "Ma'am," he asked evenly, "did you resist?" Evelyn met his gaze. "I did not." She said clearly, "I was standing on a public sidewalk waiting for a lunch reservation." The room seemed to slow. Sergeant Miller leaned back slightly, studying her again, because something about this arrest didn't sit right, and in his experience, when a stop didn't sit right, it usually meant someone had just made a very expensive mistake. Sergeant Miller exhaled slowly. "You said you were waiting for a lunch reservation," he asked again. Calmer now. "Yes," Evelyn replied. "At Dois Prezichatrazech, the Gilded Oak." Roar scoffed. "She's lying. She refused to leave when the manager told her to." "I was never told to leave," Evelyn corrected. "I was never even spoken to. This officer arrested me based on a false report." Miller looked at Roar, then back at Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said, "do you have identification?" "I do." Evelyn answered, "It's in my purse," which Officer Roar took from me and threw into the front seat of his cruiser. Miller closed his eyes for a brief moment, just long enough to signal fatigue and concern. He stepped around the desk, walked outside, and returned a minute later with the purse. He opened it carefully, removed the wallet, pulled out the first card. He froze. He blinked. Then he pulled out the second card behind it. His posture changed instantly. "Dr. Evelyn Vance," he read aloud. Roar rolled his eyes. "So she's got a doctorate. That doesn't mean she can. Not that kind of doctor." Miller snapped, cutting him off. He turned the wallet toward himself again. State Bar Association. University Faculty Identification. Miller's face drained of color. "Roar," he said quietly, "do you have any idea who this is?" Roar frowned. "I don't care who she is." Miller leaned closer, his voice dropping. "She's a constitutional law professor," he said. "She sued this department 6 years ago, and she won." The noise in the station seemed to fade. Roar's confidence cracked, just slightly. Miller straightened up. "We all sat through a 4-hour mandatory training seminar on her case," he continued. "She wrote the opinion that changed how we handle detentions." Roar swallowed. For the first time since the stop began, he looked at Evelyn not as a target, not as a problem, but as a threat. And Dr. Evelyn Vance met his gaze calmly. "I would like to make my phone call now," she said. The room went silent, because everyone there understood exactly what that call was going to do. Sergeant Miller unlocked the cuffs without a word. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." "Dr. Vance," he said quietly, handing her the phone. "You may make your call." Evelyn rubbed her wrists once, then dialed from memory. She didn't look at Roar. She didn't need to. "Robert," she said calmly when the line connected. "I'm at Central Precinct. I was detained on my way to lunch." There was a pause. "Yes," she continued. "I'm fine, but you may want to come down here." She ended the call and handed the phone back. Roar scoffed, trying to salvage what little authority he had left. Calling a friend doesn't change anything. Evelyn finally looked at him. "No," she said evenly, "but calling a federal judge does." The words landed like a concussion. 20 minutes later, the front doors of the precinct flew open. The police chief entered first, face pale, jaw clenched, followed by a tall, silver-haired man in a dark suit. His presence sucked the air out of the room. Federal Judge Robert Harrison. Every officer in the station froze. "Where is she?" the judge demanded. Evelyn stood. "I'm here," she said softly. Judge Harrison crossed the room in 3 strides. "Evelyn, are you all right?" "I am," she replied. "I apologize for missing lunch." The police chief looked like he might collapse. "I've reviewed the body cam," he said, voice strained. "It's indefensible." Evelyn nodded once. "I want that officer's badge," she said. "Not tomorrow. Today." The chief didn't hesitate. "Officer Roar," he barked. "Stand up. Gun and badge. Now." Roar rose slowly, hands shaking. The room watched in silence as metal hit wood. The sound echoed. It was the sound of power leaving the room. And Kyle Roar finally understood. The badge had never been the law. The law had been standing in front of him the entire time. By the next morning, the video was everywhere, filmed from 3 different angles. The footage showed Officer Kyle Roar ordering a woman onto the hood of his car. It showed her calmly asserting her rights. It showed him losing control. The headline spread fast. "Civil rights law professor arrested for reading a menu." News vans lined the street outside Central Precinct. Pundits debated. Lawyers paused the video frame by frame on national television, explaining exactly where the law had been broken. The department released a statement within hours. An investigation had been launched. Officer Roar had been placed on administrative leave, but it was already too late. The public had seen enough. Inside the Gilded Oak, panic set in. The owner called an emergency meeting before lunch service. Phones buzzed non-stop. Reservations were canceled in waves. By noon, Trent Miller was fired. By evening, the restaurant issued a public apology, announcing a 6-figure donation to civil rights organizations in a desperate attempt at damage control. It didn't work. Protesters gathered outside the restaurant by the weekend. Boycotts spread across social media. Reviews flooded in, all saying the same thing. If you don't belong here, they'll make sure you know it. The fallout was no longer about one officer. It was about a system that had nodded along for years. And now, it was being forced to answer. The investigation didn't take long. Body camera footage, witness videos, dispatch records. Every lie in the original call was exposed. Every unlawful command documented. Every second of excessive force preserved in high definition. Officer Kyle Roar was terminated. Not suspended. Not transferred. Fired. His certification was revoked. He was barred from law enforcement statewide. The badge he once hid behind became evidence. The civil lawsuit followed swiftly. Dr. Evelyn Vance named everyone. Officer Rohr for false arrest, excessive force, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The police department for failure to supervise and a documented pattern of misconduct. The city for allowing 14 prior complaints to vanish without consequence. And the Gilded Oak for racial discrimination and filing a false police report, facing a trial they knew they would lose. The city settled $3.5 million. Rohr wasn't protected this time. Because he was personally named in the suit, his legal fees crushed him. He sold his house. His savings evaporated. Friends disappeared. Meanwhile, the Gilded Oak never recovered. 6 months later, the lights went dark. The doors closed. The lease was terminated. Power had finally been forced to answer. But for Evelyn, the victory didn't feel complete, because she knew something the headlines didn't say. Justice came not because the system worked, but because she had the tools to fight back. And most people don't. 6 months later, the corner looked different. Where the Gilded Oak once stood polished marble, velvet curtains, guarded entrances, there was now a small cafe with wide windows and handwritten menus taped to the glass. On a quiet afternoon, Dr. Evelyn Vance stood on the same sidewalk. She was doing the same thing, reading the menu. A young patrol officer walked past. He slowed, recognized her, and gave a respectful nod. "Good afternoon." "Dr. Vance," he said. "Good afternoon, officer," she replied. She had won. The lawsuit, the settlement, the accountability. But the victory felt incomplete. Because Evelyn knew the truth behind the headline, she survived that encounter not because the system protected her, but because she had knowledge, status, and witnesses. For every Evelyn Vance who can quote case law under pressure, there are thousands of people who can't. People who don't know their rights. People who don't have cameras watching. People whose names will never trend. That's the real question this story leaves us with. Why does it take a civil rights law professor to survive a routine police encounter? Why is calm expected from citizens, while aggression is excused from authority? Knowledge is power, but power without accountability is dangerous. So what do you think? Should police officers be required to carry personal liability insurance so taxpayers aren't forced to pay for misconduct? Comment yes if you agree. If you believe accountability matters, subscribe and share this story, because the light only stays on if we keep shining it. Thanks for watching.